Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you and good morning. My name is Ian Underwood, and I'm a network analyst on the network design and architecture team here at Boston Children's Hospital. And I've been with the team for about 6.5 years. What are the odds? My primary responsibility is the design side of the hospital's campus network. So this pretty much covers all of our clinical, administrative, and research spaces supporting our institution, which supports over 17,000 employees and associated personnel. So what I'm here today is to present one of the ways we're using NetBox to solve a problem at Children's Hospital. So we're going to call this NBOG. It's essentially NetBox plus OpenGear. And it's the command line Python script, which integrates the data we have in NetBox and allows us to use the full function set of our OpenGear terminal servers. For a little bit of history, we first introduced OpenGear into our network in 2017 as an upgrade path away from aging and unsupported platforms. These were primarily supplied by digital, yes, really, and Cisco routers with asynchronous serial network modules, both of which have been long unsupported. The following year, we started to reintroduce fully managed PDUs into our network. We've used PDUs for many years, but we wanted to be able to manage and control them remotely on a per outlet basis. And we have a multi-vendor PDU environment, mostly out of equipment made from APC, Vertiv, and Baytech. In 2020, we first started looking at NetBox as a candidate replacement for our previous documentation methods. These include Excel sheets, various locations, stored in various locations, some including SharePoint, other file-based storage, and any of the other CMDBs we had available at the time weren't really friendly or suitable to the task. So after some time putting data into NetBox, started to wonder if it was possible that we could build some glue to kind of bring these things together. And that has been the case. But for this, let's define the problem. So the OpenGear does a lot. It's one of the reasons we selected their equipment as our standard bearer. Obviously, console access was the most important part. Ourselves and networking and other departments have come to rely on console access via Secure Shell, TCP raw sockets, Telnet, yes, still. However, there were a couple of new features that were previously unavailable. We could define security groups, which allows us to control access via TACACS. We now had the ability to work with managed PDUs, so allowing us for power cycling when remote hands are not available, and an integrated menu set so we could send proper breaks and do controls from within inside the console itself. Also, configuring the end port for initial needs out of the box was dead simple. For doing any kind of a replacement, that was kind of an important piece. Now, as far as bringing all those components together, not so simple. Well, it's easy enough to define a system. Making sure the system has the proper outlets, serial ports, and security groups all tied together is an exercise in tedium in a process that has cried out for automation since it was first introduced. So we never really used any of the features before NetBox really came on the scene. So this is how we did it. The first part and the longest to execute was getting the data into NetBox. So that required considerable build out of our facilities in data center and on campus. Of particular interest for the OpenGear is the cable plant and all the supporting infrastructure that ties all that equipment together. With the information in place, coming up with a script to build out the required configuration would also take some time. In the first run doing this, we used the RAML API that OpenGear provides. However, that is limited really to only the console ports. But it was enough to kind of get our feet wet with the idea. The second run, which is in this component I'm talking about, executes all the changes via the OpenGear CLI and gives us access to the entire boat. So in a series of loops within loops, the system does a couple different things. Configures all the serial ports with all the parameters that are defined on the console port of the remote device is connected to. We use a series of tags to define non-default parameters. So these are like a wiring mode change between, let's say, Cisco straight and Cisco rollover, We also support non-standard parity with a couple random devices that'll be like 72, and a couple of other non-defaults. This also configures the RPDUs on the OpenGear, and we use a tag that's applied to the platform. So as long as the RPDU has a primary IP and a platform with an OGRPC tag, then the RPDU can be added. And then finally, security groups are also defined. So within the script, I use a slug map to take the slug of a security tag and apply an equivalent component in the OpenGear that is used by SecureACS. And then finally, all the permissions have to be rolled up into a system, which contains all of the things, the ports, the outlets, the security. The thing allows all our admins to see everything, but now the individual groups can see their own devices and manage them. So, I mean, there were some challenges. Obviously, getting the data integrity and making sure everything was in is kind of a new process, not having everything in a network-based CMDB before. So that's the most important. We also had a couple of bugs too. So we found that if the OpenGear wasn't in at least 14.3.2, we would lose permissions for access. And that's a bug that was fixed in the release notes. In tying into integrity component, we had to add additional data to some of the builds because we've been building in NetBox for a while. So not everything had a platform definition or an IP added to it. We are primarily an info blocks shop, so that's where all the IP info really lives. So we had to kind of pull in some of it there. And then loops within loops. I think anybody that's done any kind of development, once you get a couple loops deep in, it can be a little confusing to kind of keep up with that. So for an unconfigured system, a first run will take over 1,600 command line changes. And it takes about between 15 and 20 minutes to process, but can go up to a half an hour. So there's a lot going on. And then there's just the last part of data constraints that we had to be aware of. So ports in the OpenGear had to be named exactly as they're defined. On the PDUs themselves, the outlets had to be numbered in sequence. So we got a little creative with labeling when we first started defining device types and those kinds of groups. So had a little bit of cleanup to do. But once all that stuff was done, it was go time. So I'm going to do a quick part of the demo here. I'm going to show some of the updating script. And then I'll show you a couple of things on what it looks like and what we can do. So here I've got my terminal server up. So I have it's just a NBOG CLI. I'm already in my VENV. So I'm going to be using one of the terminal servers that I've had to do a couple things on. So really all I do is specify the terminal server. And it goes and talks to the NetBox database and it looks for, do I have a device with this name? And does it have a platform and an IP? Now, if I leave that off, the script will go through and process every terminal server I have that's properly defined in the system. So I could let this run and it will go through every terminal server. It'll check every port, every PDU, every security permission. With this particular run in the command, it's not making any changes, but it's trying to figure out what it's going to change. And at the end, it will generate an output. And this takes about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes to run. So while it's doing that, I'm going to hop on over to one of my terminal servers here. This is the one that I've been primarily working on. And I'm going to log into this with kind of a limited account. So not Underwood is one I use for testing on campus with different permissions. And this one is limited only to things that are stuffed into like a network administrator type of role. So through SecureACS, it says, okay, you've got the security group for networking for the OpenGear. You're not an administrator. You don't have any of the things. So what I have available to me is every switch here. I've got both ports because they're all dual soup, and then all of the outlets that are available to me on each of them. And through the updates on the OpenGear, these keep track of what the outlet states are roughly every minute. And we can see here that there are a couple that only have 2 power supplies. So this is kind of what the other script in the back end is taking care of. So I can go through there, and now it's doing its part of the PDU loop. And what it has done is it has put up a list of changes that it's proposing. So this is every point on the command line. So it's going to tell me what those things are. As it turns out, also includes my SNMP write community. So I'm not going to dwell on that one too much. But to give you another idea, I'm going to log into this one as an administrator, partly because there's a widget bug on the OpenGear that I'm working through with them. Just to show you a little bit of a difference in the information available on the UI, if I get my password right.
Ian, just so you know, we're getting kind of close to time there.
Yep.
All right.
So I don't know what's wrong with it, but let's see. But I mean, that's really about it. I've got a couple things I'm looking at in the future. So just to allow devices to be configured for ports if I don't have a connection. It's not everything does. Looking at doing an open source release to GitHub once I get some stuff out of the code, along with appropriate documentation. And possibly in the future, looking at doing building out the XML config directly instead of using the command line, but it's much faster, but it's kind of risky. Bad XML brick the system, which certainly be unfortunate. And then potentially something with automatic updates, whether it's a periodic cron job or webhooks. So it's kind of a lot to shove in there. So that you can hang around after for anyone that has any questions.